So this is a summary of the gaps and silences in Macbeth, which will allow you to make your own creative response within this world and the character base of the story. In terms of general advice, you should pick an act you're connected with or found particularly exciting, and then you're going to focus in on that 1/5 of the text. Once you've selected that act, you're going to go through really thoroughly, more so than you did for the rest of the text, and you're going to look for literary devices especially, but also themes, symbols and motifs. And what you want to avoid is including themes, devices, symbols or motifs that are not actually present in that part of the text. So once you've done that, you want to select your text type, and keep in mind different text types give you different opportunities to try different things and to use different modes of expression. And the main thing is be consistent within your act and only include elements that are originally present in the act, and try as much as possible to capture the essence of the characters you're writing from the perspective of. You don't necessarily need to have it as Old English, but the core concepts need to be there. Act 1, you're essentially choosing either to be the witches or to be one of the number of the key men who are affected by the prophecies and the meetings with the witches. The most obvious example is before the witches arrive, or before they are encountered by Macbeth. What do they decide before and after, and what are they planning, and how happy are they with the meeting that they had with Macbeth? The second option is also within Act 1, Scene 1, but it's just what is their grand plan? How does this fit within the moving pieces, the cogs of the other plans that they have organised? From Scene 2, you could explain how Cawdor became a traitor and lost his thaindom. From Scene 3, you could talk about how Banquo felt about his part in the prophecy. We hear a little bit about Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's thoughts on this, but we never really hear from him, so you could add that. Similarly, you could talk about Duncan or Malcolm's, the effect of the prophecy on them, and Macbeth becoming Thane and how they feel about that, what plans that puts in place for them, or what political machinations they produce as a result of that. In Scene 7, we could hear what Macbeth actually thinks about the murder, which is not something we actually hear. We just see him do the deed, which is one way of sort of depersonalizing the act and still allowing us to remain seeing him as the hero of the story. But if you add in what he actually thought about it and the process he went through before he killed them and what he went through after, that would definitely change the tone of the piece. And obviously Duncan is murdered in this act, so you can either describe what he felt beforehand, during, or transcendentally as a ghost or something similar, how he felt afterward. Act 2, you're mostly looking at the aftermath. So again, you could talk about Duncan and his experience of the murder. You could talk about his guard's experience of being drugged and sort of being found in a dereliction of duty. From Scene 3, you could talk about Macduff, Lennox and Duncan's understanding of what happened and their discussion of who they suspect of the murder. So Act 3 is where things get a little bit spooky. So you could write about Banquo's emerging suspicion of Macbeth as the murderer from Scene 1. You could write sort of like a sleep journal or something similar about the way Lady Macbeth and Macbeth have been sleeping as a result of their act, their murderous deed. You could have a little conversation between Banquo and Fleance discussing the events that have led up to them heading into the woods. So we never really learn how or where Fleance escapes, so you could sort of elaborate on this gap or missing part of the narrative. From Scene 4, we could talk about Fleance, where he goes and if he claims his kingship at the end, or sort of what he does in the intervening times, if that's what you choose. We could have a soliloquy from Banquo's ghost, summing up his life's work and what happened in the end. From Scene 5, we could jump into the witches again. You could sort of have a discussion or maybe a list of rules that Hecate has set out for the behaviour or the goings-on of witches and how they should interact with things, whether they do it directly or whether they have to do it, as is shown in this story, through sort of suggestion and you playing on the ego of the male characters. A weird one from Scene 6, you talk about what the chefs prepared for the banquet. It's a bit of a strange one. For Scene 2, we could talk about the messengers and how they felt passing on the message to Lady Macduff. Similar to the messengers, we could hear a little bit more about the murderers, who sort of appear as big characters and we don't hear anything else about them. You could provide a bit of a backstory for the murderers and how they got involved in this particular murder. We could hear about Lady Macduff's son and how his involvement with the murder and how he felt about it. We could hear about Ross's departure, or Ross's account of Macduff's departure. Or most interesting of all, I think, from Act 3, we could hear about Macduff's preparation to go kill Macbeth. So does he have an opinion that he's, imbued with specific powers, or is he just going out as a normal soldier? How does he feel about the whole thing? Does he see his role as something important within the sort of divine hierarchy? Is he trying to, does he feel his role is to kill the unjust king and replace it with himself, the just king? How does he feel about that? So for Act 5, you're thinking about doctors, Lady Macbeth, and Macbeth in their build up to the ending of the play. From scene 1, you could have Lady Macbeth's dreams and hallucinations that she's described as having, but you could actually illustrate them in a little bit more detail, use a bit of literary devices to draw that out. You could give us a doctor's report on Lady Macbeth's understanding, so psychological damage or what particular manifestation she's showing. From scene 2, you could have an account of the men who are joining the army to go and fight Macbeth. From scene 3, this never really happens, but you could have Macbeth hearing sort of counsel from other people suggesting what he should do about the oncoming onslaught. You could similarly have the doctor explaining Macbeth's mental health at this point. From scene 4, you could hear about what Macbeth actually put in place defending the siege that is coming, the woods that are coming upon his castle. And scene 5, Lady Macbeth is basically omitted from the play at this point, so you could have something of a soliloquy or a final letter or some final thoughts for her or from her. And then just as a throwaway one, if you really want, you could have the return of zombie Macbeth and sort of reflecting on his past problems, his issues, where he went wrong specifically within the plot. This would probably give you the biggest scope to show off your knowledge of the play. If you're not particularly strong in the play, definitely avoid this sort of thing, as generally the later acts will require you to show a much greater analysis of the plot, whereas the earlier acts a little bit less so. So keep that in mind when you're choosing which of these gaps you'll choose, and then what text type and what literary devices you'll use to support that.